All right, next we have a real treat. We have a man who has put his line on the line for our country. He served as a United States Marine, served in Kuwait and Iraq, and he is now reaching out to those who have taken the oath as law enforcement officers and military men to urge them to actually live up to their oath that they took to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Please welcome Jay Stang of the Oath Keepers.
How's it going tonight? I get my microphone the way I like it. I wrap my sashes around the microphone stand. Just kidding. Who knows what a principal is? Who likes principals? P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E-S, not the guy that ran your school when you were a kid. Principles are good, right? We hear a lot about principles. Principles are what matters. Pragmatism is bad. But the people we hear them from are usually the first people to abandon them at the first sign of political expediency. And by that I mean most rank-and-file Republicans. They talk a lot about principles and they're values voters, and they have all these moral laws that they like to follow. The problem is there's one other instinct within them that will override the principles they claim to hold, and that is party loyalty. So they jump up and down against the person who says doesn't have any principles, and the candidates that they support also jump up and down and say all kinds of nasty things about the eventual pragmatic presumptive nominee, but then they still talk about these principles that they hold, even though that the person that they now said they'll support solely out of party unity shares none of those principles. So they really don't have any principles, because a principle is something that you hold on to even if it's not popular, even if it's not politically expedient, because it's a principle. That's the very definition of the word. You can also say a principle is your values or your ethics or your morals. And so if they really are your values, your ethics, or your morals, or your principles, then you should hold on to them. Because if you're going to abandon them at the first sign of pragmatism, then they really aren't your principles. You have other principles, but they're not what you profess to have. And as you could probably guess, what I'm saying is based on conversations I've had recently with people who claim to be men of principle, but then support somebody who has no principles. And it's a common affliction in America today that people say they are pro-life, they say they're pro-this or anti-that, but then the candidates they support are none of those. So I wonder sometimes, how can you say that you have principles or you support someone who doesn't have any principles? How does that work? It doesn't really work at all, and that's why we're in the situation we're in. If people voted for their principles, then the question of electability wouldn't matter, because then it wouldn't be a popularity contest, or it wouldn't be, well, I like this guy but he'll never get elected, so I'll vote for the guy who completely disagrees with my principles. Or I'll vote for a guy who disagrees with 90% of what I believe in, and I'll not vote for the guy who I agree with 95% of what he says. You're never going to like every single stand a politician has. It's the nature of life. But you can't abandon your principles just because the guy you like is not going to win, and vote for a guy who you hate but is going to win. Because if the purpose, one local activist told me today that he got into politics to push his party's platform. But the person he's now supporting for president does not even closely align to the platform of his party, the GOP party. And I think it's astounding to me, because this is one of the guys, this guy is a strong social conservative. He's a culture warrior. He is this, that, and the other. He has these principles, and he jumps up and down about how bad Ron Paul is. He doesn't have the same principles we do. And he says that, and then in the next breath he says he's going to support David Dewhurst, who's a strong conservative. Calm it down. David Dewhurst is not a strong conservative, He's not a conservative, he's not a moderate, but the only possibility that he's right is maybe I don't know what the word conservative means now. That's possible, right? Because the word conservative has changed its meaning more time than the word cool, or hot, or awesome. Conservative nowadays is completely different from what it meant 20, 25 years ago. Because in the 25 years ago, the neoconservatives were still Trotskyite Democrats who moved over to the Republican Party only because they knew they weren't going to get what they wanted in the Democratic Party. Just in case you're wondering, neoconservatism is an ideological branch of Trotskyism. Of course, Leon Trotsky was the other person that founded the Soviet Union along with Vladimir Lenin. Lenin and Trotsky had a falling out. Trotsky fled to Mexico, which is where he was murdered some years later. But before he was murdered, he was unfortunately able to spread more of his ideological venom to people like Leo Strauss, who went to the University of Chicago, who taught young Billy Crystal at his knee, and then Bill Crystal taught Irving Crystal, and it went from there. I've heard it said that you could literally pack a certain 25 people on a desert island, remove all communications from them. Afghanistan, Iraq, the Patriot Act, the Intelligence Reform Act, the Military Commissions Act, the NDAA, none of that would have happened. Because only 25 people were able to influence the course of our country and the world in an irrevocable manner. So they have their principles that they stick to, but they dupe people into voting for them whose principles are completely opposite. If you have a principle, then you should vote your principle and vote your conscience, regardless of whether the guy you vote for can win or not. And that's what Ron Paul's been doing for the past 30 years. That's why they call him Dr. No, because he votes alone most of the time. In the face of ridicule, in the face of jeers and heckling and dismissal, Ron Paul votes the way he votes. You may not like it. You're not going to like it the way every politician votes, or you're not going to like every way they vote. But if it's a choice between voting for a guy who agrees with 95% of what you believe in, and you disagree with them 5%, I think that's about as good as you're going to get in this world. Nothing's perfect in this world, but 95% is a good way to go. And you're probably not going to agree with every single one of Steve Susman's or Zach Grady's policy positions. But you could probably hit 90 or 95%, right? If that's the case, then you should go with that. Because you're not going to get any better unless you yourself run for public office. And then if you don't agree with yourself, well then we have a place that you should go. It's called the loony bin. You probably have voices talking to you. You know, when you talk to God, you're praying, right? But when God talks to you, you're crazy. Remember that next time you hear a politician say that God told him or her to do this or that. I write a little blog on occasion, and it's about breaking political ideas down into simple forms or terms. And I've come up with 4 rules. A couple of them had refinement from my dad, but there are 4 simple rules. And if you follow the rules, you'll be able to cut through the smoke, mirrors, and the fog of war that define modern politics. The number 1 thing you have to do is you have to know the origin of political ideas. If you know that the income tax, agricultural subsidies, the Department of Labor, Department of Education, the Federal Reserve, labor unions, there's so many, I can't remember them all. If you know that all of those concepts or organizations, their ideological origin is in Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto, then you'll look differently at the people who say they're for the Constitution and say they're conservatives, but at the same time push these concepts. Who remembers Michelle Bachmann, former presidential candidate, pounding her little fist on the podium during the debates and saying, everybody's got to pay their fair share. We all need skin in the game. Who remembers that in the debates? Okay? She's the founder of the Tea Party caucus. She set up Constitution classes for all the incoming freshmen of the Tea Party class of 2010. So she says she's pro-Constitution, but at the same time she's pushing a concept which Karl Marx says is necessary to form a communist country. So what's the problem here? She probably doesn't know the origin of her political ideas. And so through ignorance, she pushes an income tax because she thinks that everybody needs to contribute. The second thing I say is, you have to know the origin of political people. Who knows that the Tea Party Express is run by Dick Armey and Freedom Works? Who knows what Dick Armey was up to in the 90s? He was a congressman from Texas who was all about the Grady bill, NAFTA, GATT, WTO, all of those sovereignty-killing measures that they love to talk about creating jobs here.